This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us via Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Cutter's Edge, who just signed up to make monthly contributions to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 478 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new Netflix series Masters of the Universe Revelation, written by Kevin Smith. And this will include spoilers for the first 5 episodes, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 19th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown. And she's currently shopping her reality show, The Night. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Then next up, we've got Christopher M Cevasco, making his 12th appearance on the show. His novel Beheld will be published by Lethe Press in April. It's a darkly twisted psychological thriller set in 11th century England, exploring the legend of Lady Godiva's naked ride through Coventry. Chris is also the former editor of Paradox Magazine, and he's written 20 Dungeons & Dragons supplements, including the best-selling Felosiel's Ultimate Guide to Poison, which are available now through the DM's Guild website. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Very happy to be back.
And also joining us today is Zach Chapman, making his 11th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in Nature, Starship Sofa, Tales to Terrify, Steampunk Universe, and Writers of the Future. And he also edited the book Time Travel Tales, which includes stories by Catherine Wells, Sean Williams, and Robert Silverberg. So Zach, welcome to the show.
It's great to be back.
Okay, so let's start off with Chris, and have you tell us about your history watching He-Man.
Sure, yeah. I mean, far and away, He-Man was, and She-Ra for that matter, were my favorite cartoons of the 80s. As a kid growing up in the 80s, I just couldn't get enough of it. I actually used to record the episodes on VHS and would watch them back and take careful notes for a planned project that, of course, never came to fruition, that I wanted to make a big compendium of the entire world with, details about the history and the geography and the biographies of all the various characters. So I took my He-Man very seriously. And I'm going to go so far as to say that may have been the geekiest thing ever said on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, could be.
I'm very impressed. So do you still have those notes, or did they disappear?
I have an old attaché case that used to be my dad's that I inherited from him, and it is stuffed to bursting with all my old notes and sketches and drawings and maps and everything. Yes, I do still have it.
Chris, I want to see pictures of this. Please send.
too.
Because I have, like a box of my old drawings and things, and the first couple are all like He-Man and Battle Cat, and I thought that was going to establish my He-Man cred, but I've just been completely blown out of the water by Chris here. Favorite show of the 80s. So
favorite cartoon show of the 80s, for sure, yeah.
Wow. Okay, we'll have to come back to that. But so how about Andrea? What's your history of watching He-Man?
Well, I was a kid in the 80s. I do remember watching it. I was more of a book fan, and probably when it first came out, I was just starting to get into Lord of the Rings, which was an obsession of mine. So, this sort of dovetailed pretty well. I remember enjoying it because it was just fun fantasy kind of stuff. But what I do remember about it is those little, the little tags at the end, like, wash your hands every every time after a meal, before a meal or something like that. And I remember cause I was like maybe 11 or 12, something like that. And I remember kind of feeling like, oh, this might be a little bit too young for me, but what the hell? So yeah, that is my, He-Man history.
Well, yeah, because if you were a kid in the 80s, this was pretty much it for sword and sorcery. I mean, like, and I feel so lucky that the show existed when I was a kid to introduce me from pretty much as young as I can remember to the sword and sorcery genre. Because I love all that stuff. I love the, badass swordsmen and, witches and, evil sorcerers.
It was this and Thundercats.
Gods, all that stuff.
Yeah,
Thundercats was on at the same time, wasn't it? Or was it?
Thundercats was about this. Let's see. I wrote it down. Thundercats was 85 and He-Man was 83. So this was on for 2 years before Thundercats started.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, they overlapped. Like,
yeah.
I guess they technically, because I guess He-Man was technically 83 to 85, but they were showing the episodes over and over and over again after that. So I mean, obviously you could watch them, in the same time frame. But yeah, and I also just want to, if people don't remember the early 80s or mid 80s, like my sense is that the show was so popular, I don't know that there's anyone who's my age who didn't watch He-Man. Like, do you, Chris and Andrea, agree with that? Have you ever met anyone who didn't watch He-Man?
Well, I mean, I went to Catholic school, and then high school was all girls Catholic school. So you just didn't admit to being a science fiction and fantasy fan because, it wasn't cool. I didn't have a lot of geeks, so I never had anybody to talk about it with, either that or the books or anything. So I was sort of isolated. I was an isolated geek.
I feel like you didn't have to be a geek to watch He-Man. Like, I feel like just even girls, like if they had a brother or like friends who were boys or something, like I just feel like it was on so much, and few channels.
Yeah, I definitely don't think there was anyone who hadn't at least caught an episode or something. But there were certainly people who didn't care for it and didn't watch it. But I mean, I think it was kind of hard. It was fairly ubiquitous for a while. Like you had to have at least been flipping the channels and caught an episode or two.
Yeah,
that's what I'm not saying everyone was a fan. I'm just saying, like, there's no one who's like, He-Man, what's that? It was like,
oh yeah, no, not knowing about it. But yeah, I don't think I ever had any kind of like water cooler discussions in grammar school about it.
Yeah. I'll also just say, and I hadn't really thought about this consciously until sort of doing research for this panel, but like before He-Man, the cartoons that were popular were like the Flintstones, the Jetsons, the Smurfs, Scooby-Doo. It wasn't really like the sort of action movie kind of genre.
No, not at all.
And then He-Man was sort of the first thing like that.
I mean, I will say that you had Thundar the Barbarian.
Wow. Well, that's a deep cut.
Which was from like the 70s and, aired forever on Saturday morning cartoons. And then you also had, I don't remember the overlap of this. You may have checked this, but you did have the Dungeons and Dragons Saturday morning cartoon for a little while. I don't remember
that at all.
Oh, I'm almost, I didn't actually check that, but I'm almost certain He-Man was on before that.
Maybe.
But yeah, I guess, but I mean, like, I never even saw, I mean, I know of Thundar the Barbarian, but I haven't seen it. I don't know if most people today would have even like remember that or ever watched it. So, I mean, like He-Man, I feel like was the first that sort of popularized.
Yeah, for sure.
That kind of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so then I want to get to Zach, who was too young to have ever watched He-Man growing up. And so Zach, you just went and watched some of the old episodes this week, right?
Yes, that's right. So I hadn't watched any He-Man whatsoever until this week. Actually, that's not true, because last night you sent me a link to something, and I had actually seen that probably when I was like 12 or 13. It came out. So I was born in 90. I had no, exposure to He-Man whatsoever. That wasn't cool or popular. I had a little bit of exposure to Thundercats, which I really did not like. That was not cool or popular when I was at the right age for that. And then when this 2002-ish reboot happened, I believe I actually saw like the one or two of those episodes back then. But it just, the animation style was like this weird combo between anime and American animation, and it just didn't feel, I just didn't gravitate towards it. So I watched like one episode and then never watched it again, and then had forgotten everything about He-Man until this week. And that's been my exposure of He-Man. I have watched I think probably the whole series of Thundar the Barbarian, because really? Yeah, well, I'm obsessed with the Dying Earth subgenre, and that is like that fits perfectly into the Dying Earth subgenre, because it does take place. It's very similar to He-Man. Almost like I feel like He-Man ripped it off a little bit, but it has like some bigger names. Like, it was created by Steve Gerber, who's a really talented, amazing writer, who did Man-Thing in the 70s for Marvel, and he invented Howard the Duck. At least I think he invented Howard the Duck. And it had designs from Jack Kirby. I think allegedly. I don't know if that's like verified, but I'm pretty sure Thundar the Barbarian and most of the creatures were designed by Jack Kirby.
Well, so let me explain. I mean, that, as Zach mentioned, there were, after the Masters of the Universe cartoon from the 80s that everyone remembers, there was one called The New Adventures of He-Man in 1990, and another one called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe in 2002. And I had never even heard of these until this week. So, and the one from 1990 was it was done by a Japanese studio, the animation, and it looks very, very, very anime. And then the one from 2002, it looks to me like Don Bluth. It looks a lot like Titan AE that we watched, or like, Anastasia, things like that. It's very much in that style. And I only watched like the first two episodes of the 2002 one, and otherwise I'm totally unfamiliar with those ones. But so Zach, so what did you think of the one from 1983 of the show, when you just went back and coming to it fresh?
I really enjoyed it. I loved it. Like I was saying, I am a big fan of the Dying Earth subgenre, and just Jack Vance's writing as a whole. I like Planet of Adventure series and all the Dying Earth series, and even just stuff before that, like Robert E. Howard, Conan, and Michael Moorcock. And I was just getting like these vibes, like, this is what these writers read, and then they just kind of made these stories based kind of very similar. These stories are just these little adventures that are sword and sorcery, or sword and planet, everything does, not everything, but a lot of these episodes kind of have this visual, like this aesthetic that feels kind of Dying Earth. It has these reds and these browns and these kind of like these colors that you associate with fall and like entropy. And so I was digging all of that. Not all of the episodes are like that, but I just like really, really glad you called me for this, because I had, like I said, never watched any of this, and now I'm like kind of obsessed with it. I want to seek out more.
Well, there's 130 episodes or something, so there's plenty to watch. So Chris, when you listen to Zach talking here about the Dying Earth and everything, is that kind of why you were into He-Man, or was there some other reason?
No, I don't think so, because I actually had not really been exposed to all those underlying sources at the time that I was watching it. So I definitely...
Well, I assume, like, as a little kid you hadn't read Jack Vance and stuff. I'm just saying, like, was it those themes, you think, or were there other things about?
I just think I just found the sort of world building and the stories and the kind of mythology of the world interesting. So yes, to the extent that some of that overlaps with that, but I don't know. I mean, I just was a big fan of fantasy in general at the time, and that sort of scratched that itch for me, I think. I don't know that it's particularly because it had the same sort of themes as the Dying Earth type of stuff, but just just I just found it. I was really pulled in by the whole milieu, the whole the setting, the characters, the history behind it, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, because what Zach's saying does resonate with me. I mean, even as a 5-year-old, I think one of the things that I really liked about He-Man was the sort of spooky, dark quality of that world, as opposed to like, the Jetsons or like Stones or whatever.
Yeah, the Smurfs or something.
The other thing that's like instantly that pulls me in, and this is like when this is for like a lot of genres and subgenres, but when you mix two genres, I'm just instantly I love that. And I guess we'll get to this, but it's it's based off a toy line, and it's kind of like anything you say goes. Like, okay, there's a sorcerer there, but he uses a ray gun, and he's got a a very horrific like face, like a skull. So it's like it's mixing horror, it's mixing like fantasy and science fiction, and it's just this amalgam of like all my favorite nerdy things put together. And so you don't know what's going to happen next episode. Are they going to be off in space, or are they going to be time traveling to the past, or are they going into another dimension that's all fantasy like and it's just completely swords and sorcery and fireballs and stuff? And I like that's really exciting. Like, what comes next? You don't know. It could be any genre.
Yeah.
I think for me it was like the first exposure to the mix of fantasy and science fiction that I'd ever encountered. Other than maybe the only other thing I can think of is, I read a lot of the Pern books when I was a kid, which sort of does that later on in the series. But this is the first time I can remember. I remember thinking that's really cool. Like, oh, there's magic and there's guns. Like, that's kind of cool.
Yes. So, Andrea, have you watched any He-Man episodes since 1987?
I have not. No, no. I think I probably dropped off before there because in 1987 I was like an older teenager. It was,
Yeah, definitely. By the time the show was in its later seasons, I was probably too old for it as well. But I kept watching it. I mean, I remember when when they launched She-Ra, which they did by releasing the cinematic movie Secret of the Sword in movie theaters. I remember going with my friends to see that in the theater, and I still have the comic books of the movie that they handed out in the theater lobby when you went to see it, which was really kind of a cool thing. That even I kind of don't remember having that happen before or since with any other movie I went to, where they gave you a comic book of the movie when you arrived for it, just with your ticket price. So
that's so 1950s.
Right. I mean, that's, obviously way before our time, but I mean, it, I mean, I loved the movie. It launched the whole She-Ra line and tied it in really well with what had come before with Masters of the Universe. And so I was all on board with that show as well.
Chris, what was your age? Cause I'm curious, cause I watched a documentary saying that this was really geared toward 5-year-old boys, and so I'm wondering.
I don't know if I'd agree with 5-year-old boys. I would say to me, it always felt like it was probably geared toward like 10 to 12-year-old boys.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, but I was born in 1972, so I was an early teenager when it came out. Right, I guess if it came out in 1983, so I guess I was 11, right?
Yeah. Well, you seem to be right in the wheelhouse for what they were going
certainly
for.
By the time you get to the last seasons of it and then She-Ra, then I was more sort of like a mid-teenager and probably was starting to skew toward the upper end of who it was, targeted toward. But, by that point I was so invested in it that I just kept right along.
Yeah.
Well, I was born in 1977, so I was literally like 5 or 6 when I was watching He-Man, for sure. Yeah. And so I thought that, because I said, I had all these He-Man drawings and everything, I just loved it. And I thought that I remembered it pretty well, but I did not. I mean, like going back and watching it and watching the new show and everything, I was like, I remembered like there's He-Man and Battle Cat and Orko and Skeletor. I definitely remembered really well. And then like Man-at-Arms, I'm like, I kind of remember him existing. And the Sorceress, I remember her being mentioned in the intro, but I couldn't have really told you anything about what she did or anything in the show. And then everyone else is pretty much a total blank. So I was actually coming to the new show a lot more fresh than I really realized. And Andrea, were you in a similar boat? Since like, how much of the show did you actually remember from back in the 80s?
I remembered everything.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, some of the more obscure characters, like I didn't like Moss Man. I didn't remember. I don't know if that was in the original series. You know, Hero. There was a couple of ones that I was like, "Who is that?" But all the principals, yeah, Evelyn, Beastman. Yeah, it was all. Yeah, I remembered pretty much all of it.
Huh. And I assume Chris remembered everything there is to know.
And Mossman was in some of the last season of He-Man. The sort of what I found to be one of the most fun introductions to the characters introduced in the new series is Stinkor, who never made it into the show, but was supposed to be in the show. They created a toy for him in the toy line, but then never actually made it into the show. So it was good to see him finally make an appearance. And it's interesting. Obviously, the show was, it was the brainchild of Mattel, and they were using it to sell their toys as well. And I think because, like, the age that I was at, I was a little too old for it to seem cool to buy toy action figures to play with anymore. And I wasn't quite old enough where it was like I could look at it as collectibles. I mean, I buy action figures now as an adult, So I never actually owned any of the toys as much as I was into the show. I was in that in-between awkward place where it just didn't seem quite the thing to do.
I totally owned the toys, man. I had tons, and I had the Castle Grayskull. It's like the suitcase thing, and you could put all your toys.
I wish I
had all that stuff, man. And I'll say, I don't know if if you want to know more about the history of He-Man, there's an episode these are both on Netflix. There's something called The Toys That Made Us, season 1, episode 3, which is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And it's only, it's like 30 minutes long or something. So if you want the quick version, you should watch that. And then there's a feature-length documentary called The Power of Grayskull, The Definitive History of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And they're both actually really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone...
I watched the Power of Grayskull this morning.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, there were just like two things I want to just mention from both. I don't remember now which was in which. But the fact that the guy who invented Skeletor, when he was a kid, he went to some amusement park and it was in like the haunted house, and this like corpse on a noose dropped down in front of him and scared the crap out of him. And he's like, "That's a real dead body. I know that's a real dead body." And it turned out it was a real dead body.
What?
He said he could smell it.
Yeah, it's this whole you should look. I won't go into the whole thing, but basically there was this outlaw who died in a shootout with police, and no one came to collect the body, and so the guy at the funeral home decided to embalm him and charge people admission to see him.
Good Lord.
And then like somebody else, a con man, came and like cheated him out of the body, and then he had sold it to a carnival or something, and then like just like it changed hands a bunch of times. And at some point, people didn't realize it was a real dead body, and so it finally ended up in this amusement park until it was finally like identified, and then now it's been like buried in a cemetery. But that's what inspired Skeletor.
I think there's a Drunk History episode about the person who died that inspired Skeletor.
That's definitely in the toys that the shorter one, because I didn't see that and I would have died laughing.
Yeah.
Also, those guys that created the toys, they're characters. Like, and there's still drama and rivalries like that are apparent today in these old men, just like grumpy or excited. It's pretty funny to see them.
Yeah. And then the other thing, the other bit of history I just want to mention is where Battle Cat came from.
Oh, so that's hilarious.
They needed one more vehicle for the line, but they had no money. And one of the guys is like, well, we already have the tools to make this tiger for this other toy line, but it's at a different scale. So it's like a giant tiger. And the guy's like, this makes no sense. It's like, it looks so ridiculous next to the other figures. This guy, Paul Cleveland, he says, quote, "I don't give a fuck. If it's as big as a horse, put a fucking saddle on it."
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I definitely really strongly recommend those. Oh, I guess the other thing I should mention is going back and watching the old cartoon. Oh, I'll say I watched 20 episodes. There's some DVD I found where it had like the 20 best He-Man episodes of the original cartoon. So I watched those. And going through the episodes, there are like names I recognize, a lot of names I recognize among the writers. You've got Michael Reeves, Paul Dini, J. Michael Straczynski, Bob Forward, DC Fontana, and Mark Scott Zickery, who has actually been on this podcast. Were all writing for He-Man back in the day, and all went on to like do lots of cartoons.
Things like Double Dragon. Anyone?
Yeah, if you missed our episode where we talked about Double Dragon, what was that? Was that video games?
Is the second? I think it was the second one, and it's also written by Paul Dini, who wrote I think 2 or 3 of the ones that are considered the best episodes. He did the one that's about the game. I think it's called like the Game Master, where it's like an alien comes down and he makes them battle each other, but then it's he has to do it not as He-Man kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be Pawns of the Game Master, episode 55 in season 1.
There you go.
But yeah, so I feel like we haven't really talked about. Like, Zach, do you have any, is there any way in which the old He-Man cartoon that you found it bad at all?
Maybe like on a technical level, they reuse, I mean, I find it charming, but they reuse animations like crazy. Prince, Adam is just, He-Man, but with a pink shirt, which is I think that's awesome, and I actually prefer that over the new series. He-Man's solution to a lot of things is to throw whatever is the obstacle, so there's a lot of throwing of things. One thing I noticed was like it's even some of the I don't know what to call this, but like the trope is very 1950s Clark Kent Superman vibes. It's almost ripped straight from that, because you don't like he has the same personality as the 1950s Superman, which I love. I love how he's the bumbling Clark Kent when he's Prince Adam, and then he's got to run into the phone booth and turn into Superman to fight Skeletor. I love that. But I think maybe even at the time that could have been considered dated. But yeah, to me, it's all just very charming. And even the you see the same animations over and over again. But I mean, that's common even in modern anime shows.
I can't think of any show I've ever seen in which it's so apparent that they're reusing the same animations over and over and over again.
They did a lot of that.
Yeah.
Anytime someone lands after a jump, you get that back view of their legs flexing as they land. That they use those cutscenes like 400 million times.
I think it's the same throw animation too, and he just throws like random things, and so that's like why his fighting solution. I mean, thankfully, there's usually some kind of narrative solution to the problem, but then there's a fight scene, and he'll like throw Beastman, or he'll throw a rock, or he'll throw just whatever bad guy, and they'll go sailing off.
Well, I strongly suspect that the reason that Prince Adam and He-Man look exactly the same is so they could just reuse all the facial art.
Sure.
They didn't have to draw a new character.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is, for me, that's the biggest problem with the show, is that I just can't suspend disbelief that people don't know that, that Prince Adam and Cringer are, they don't realize that they're the same as He-Man and Battle-Cat, whereas He-Man looks exactly the same except with different clothes, and Battle-Cat is like 15% bigger, but he's still a green tiger with orange stripes. Like, come on. But so Chris, can you bring yourself to admit any flaws?
Well, I mean, I think the flaws that exist in it are sort of the same flaws that often exist when you go back and watch anything that you loved as a child. Like, I
Mhm.
remember the plots being far more sophisticated than they actually were, and this sort of, advancement of the plot being more like compelling. And when you go back and watch it, often that still is the case, but more often it's just like, okay, this is, you understand where this plot is going in this episode from the first minute, and then it's just sort of plotting through, waiting for them to get there, because it's very, it's just very telegraphed, and you understand what they're doing right away. So, watching it as an 11-year-old versus watching it as an adult is a very different experience. And it becomes clear that they were writing it for 11-year-olds.
Yeah.
But, and of course, yeah, I agree. The reusing of the animation doesn't bother me. And I'm even willing to suspend my disbelief that they, that no one noticed it, because it's just like, well, okay. But yeah, I mean, I think it just suffers from the same flaws that any sort of childhood thing does when you go back and look at it. But in general, I still love the whole concept behind it. And I love the fact that it wasn't just, like you said, sort of like a run-of-the-mill cartoon where everything was just sort of on the surface. Like with various episodes throughout the run, you find out layers and layers of like history behind characters, and they bring certain elements back, and the sort of relationships that develop, and the sort of mythology behind the world gets more and more developed as it goes along. And that kind of stuff I still really like.
Mm-hmm. All right, so why don't we get to the new show? So this is brand new on Netflix, written by Kevin Smith. It's called Masters of the Universe Revelation. So Andrea, what were your expectations going into this new He-Man show?
I mean, I remember you sent me the trailer and I watched it. I'm like, oh, that looks really cool. But I thought it would be a little more adult, considering that at this point we have, as a society, advanced a little more. We don't have to pander to, it seemed like a more adult show from the trailer. And that actually panned out. It was more of an adult show. The first episode, when I watched it, I was like, oh crap, I'm going to hate this, because it was what I remember of just kind of the puns and the hokiness. And I was like, oh my God, is this going to be 5 episodes of that? And then you get to episode 2 and I'm like, oh, okay, now here's a story. And I bought into it at that point. So I mean, expectations. Yeah. I mean, I guess it did live up to my expectations of hoping that it would be something a little more adult that I would like, and not be the show that I remember being aimed at 10-year-old boys.
Did you have any expectations based on the fact that it was written by Kevin Smith? Or I'll also mention the animation is done by Powerhouse Animation, which also did like the recent Netflix Castlevania and Blood of Zeus shows that we've talked about.
I didn't know it was Kevin Smith until I watched the first episode and saw the credits. I was shocked. So,
but so if you had known it was Kevin Smith, would that have given you any particular expectations?
No, I don't think it would have given me expectations. I didn't think he was going to do, Jay and Silent Bob, but set in Eternia. But, I know he's a Star Wars fanatic, and I know he likes, comic books. So I think I wouldn't have been surprised by it, and I would have expected what we got, probably.
Mm-hmm. How about Zach? What were your expectations going in?
Pretty high, I suppose, because from what I understand, I haven't watched any of The Flash, but I know he's directed a lot of the CW's Flash, and from what my friends have said, he's done pretty well for that. He's done a lot of really good runs on comic books, and yeah, he's done movies. So, and I just kind of assumed that he's probably a fan of this. So I would say that I had decently high expectations, and just based off of the trailer, to me, this animation it actually, I think, surpasses the Blood of Zeus for sure, at least in the design and the redesigns of a lot of these characters. And then just in the quality of the animation itself, like the battle scenes, I think are either on par or on average. I would say that on average they're better and more interesting than Castlevania.
Yeah, I really like the Powerhouse Animation Studio style, so I thought that they've really been killing it visually. Then how about Chris? What were your expectations going in?
Well, I mean, my expectations were actually very high, but not necessarily for perhaps some of the same reasons that we've discussed. I know who Kevin Smith is, and that's about the end of it. So I had no expectations based on his body of work. I did, however. Oh, and also I don't know any of the Powerhouse animations you're talking about. So none of that. I had no baggage going in for any of that. But I had read a few interviews with Kevin Smith about this project once it was announced that it was coming out, and based on everything he was saying in those interviews, it made my expectations very high because it sounded like he knew the material inside out and he had a deep respect for it. It was sort of the kind of expectations I had with Peter Jackson before The Lord of the Rings came out. Like it was clear you had someone who was a big, knew the material and wanted to respect the material while also, taking in whatever artistic direction that, they had. And I mean, the fact that he explicitly was telling people beforehand that this is a direct sequel to the 1980s series, that expect it to basically start up minutes after the other one ended, and there's supposed to be 100% continuity with it, and we're basically it's going to go in a very different direction, but it's that I loved that idea. I loved the idea that we were not worrying about anything else that had come in between, all these different iterations or reboots. It was just a direct sequel to the 1980s one, and I think that's why. Yeah, I had that moment too that Andrea had, where I was like, "Oh my gosh, these puns! Like, what's going on?" And I think that was a really deliberate and clever choice, because he kind of lulled you into thinking like, "Yeah, I'm just watching the same show from the '80s again," and then all of a sudden you take a sharp left turn, and everything became different. Like it became much more adult, much darker, much deeper, and so in some ways it exceeded my expectations.
I mean, I did have a, my part of my initial reaction was that I was disappointed that the show seemed to be sidelining the characters that I actually remembered. Like I said, the characters I actually remembered were like He-Man, Skeletor, Battle Cat, and it did feel like they were kind of like, it felt like this was a completely different story. It was making me think of like Logan, the sort of old Wolverine movie, where it's like, this isn't what you expect. This is this is almost like a spin-off side story kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I loved Logan, but I feel like Logan for me worked really well because like there'd already been like 10 X-Men movies kind of, so you weren't really pining for the classic X-Men experience at that point. You were ready for something new and different. Whereas I felt like certainly my initial reaction was kind of like, I kind of wanted to see like more of the He-Man that I remember, where he's like switching back and forth between Adam and He-Man and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know if anyone else had any of that reaction.
It's weird. It was weird that it's a show called He-Man and then He-Man's not really in it at all.
Well, it's technically it's called Masters of the Universe Revelation.
Well, okay, true enough. But you do go in there expecting He-Man, and then he's not there. But
yeah,
I don't know. I think I differ on that. Like, to me, I feel like even though. And obviously we're spoiling things for people, but that's fine. Even though the characters are sidelined, some of those main characters are sidelined after episode 1, I feel like they continued to loom so large in both the on-screen characters' motivations and in eventually coming back into the plot in ways that were like super powerful. I mean, when Orko returns, it's like his return was like uber memorable and like, sort of he's the big hero of the whole thing in a way. And same thing with He-Man. You find out, like, I just felt like in some ways I liked that they sidelined some of the main characters because I felt like, well, if it's just going to be seeing him transform back and forth, I mean, we've seen how many hundred episodes of that already. Like, I think this was...
but not in 30 years.
Well, yeah, but, I think it was kind of cool to see, like, if we take these characters that we know inside out and we remove a couple of the key components from the sort of mix and send them into kind of almost like an alternate historical timeline. I mean, it's not alternate history because it's going forward, but it was, to me, fascinating to see how the different characters who stay behind adapted. I mean, one of my favorite parts of the new thing was the Henry Rollins as Triclops character. that whole thing with that, that sort of echoes of the 1970s Beneath the Planet of the Apes vibe going on with the cult there. I mean, that was absolutely phenomenal. And it made perfect sense with what you know about Triclops and about the other henchmen that are with him. And it just, to me, it made the whole thing richer because you didn't just see the characters going through the same scenarios you always see them going through. You saw them having to adapt to a really, really, really different, like, world-changing, universe-changing situation and how they all adapted to that. And to me, that was the best part of it.
Well, I think that's what made it an adult show as opposed to the kids show that it was, that was episodic. This was an arc across 5 episodes.
Yeah, the Triclops thing, the Beneath the Planet of the Apes is good. It was making me think Omega Man, like 100% Omega Man with Charlton Heston. And that's what sold me on this show. I don't know if I would have kept watching, but that's totally my wheelhouse. But let me just explain the plot. And now I've watched so much He-Man since I watched this that it's a little hard to keep everything straight. But basically, like, spoiler warning, He-Man dies. Like there's this battle between He-Man and Skeletor and in Castle Grayskull, and there's like this orb of power, and it's going to explode, and He-Man sacrifices himself to keep it from destroying Eternia, and then the rest of the characters kind of have to pick up the pieces. And so Teela, who's like the captain of the guard, and she's like the person closest to He-Man who didn't know that he was really Prince Adam. And she's really put out that he never told her, and so she kind of like goes off on her own. And it has this very sort of like post-apocalyptic kind of feel to it. And gradually the characters kind of come back together. So Zach, did you watch this first, or did you go back and watch any other He-Man before watching this?
So I watched like the first 5 minutes of this and of the first episode, and then I was like, I think I should like just have a little bit more context, because I had that feeling that Kevin Smith was just like getting really into the lore, and I wanted to get the show, like, because it seemed like it was going to be good, because I was kind of digging, like, in the first 5 minutes, like, it has Orko doing the slapstick Orko thing from the original series, where he, at the beginning of most episodes, he casts a spell that, goes terribly wrong or whatever, and it's all for a joke or whatever, and Cringer's being a scaredy cat and all that stuff. So I was like, I think I need to like watch all this, the original. So I watched like 20 episodes or so, and I looked at a list of like the best ones to watch, and so I watched a lot of the highest rated ones on IMDb, and then I went back, and the thing that struck me, I really did like the first episode, because I kind of like, I felt like I got those kinds of evil Lynn and those like puns, they're actually not just in the first episode, they're throughout the whole series. It's just a little bit more apparent in the first episode because it's like more like this heroic type pre-apocalypse story. And then the thing that I didn't like so much is, well, one, it's a little bit less of the it's very apparent that it's not very apparent that Prince Adam is He-Man. I mean, he looks like it's no longer like the Clark Kent Superman thing where it's just a big dude. It's he looks like a 16-year-old skinny kid, or relatively compared to He-Man. And the other thing I didn't like was he he kind of kills, purposefully kills Skeletor after Skeletor kills Mossman, and I felt like He-Man is just so super heroic, and like he's constantly saving Skeletor despite all of the shitty things that Skeletor does in the original. And I find it really refreshing to see heroes like that are like not these very not complex heroes, these more like mythological superhero type people, where the types of stories that it's telling are just like good wins in the end or whatever. And I was just a little bummed that, he killed Skeletor pretty much. He stabbed him. So that was not like, I didn't like that as being the inciting incident, but I get it. And once I rolled with that, then it's all, it's like post-apocalyptic dying Earth shit till, he comes back. And I love that they kind of give him this mythical afterlife, which I did not see in the original series, but like when the champions die, they're awarded this afterlife when they die. That's kind of like Valhalla for warriors. And they go on like the wild hunt and all this stuff, and it's like this paradise, and then he chooses to come back to sacrifice it all. Like he's not gonna have eternal life because he chose to go back to save Eternia. And I think that's a really cool choice. I think throughout this series, like the characters are like Teela, I have a problem with, because I just don't. It bugs me when characters like run away from, like when the character arc is this character goes from running away to accepting their destiny or whatever. That's just a shitty character arc. That's boring to me. I've seen it a million fucking times. But once she's like is over that character arc at the end of like the 4th episode, when she fights Scareglow, it's better. I'm like, all right, cool. We got that over with. Thank God.
Actually, let me pick up on that, because that was my and I forgot to explain the reason that the show feels post-apocalyptic is because when this orb of power like is going to blow up and He-Man sacrifices himself, that kind of like breaks magic in this world, and so magic afterward is really weak, and sort of spells are just barely sputtering if they work at all. And so the Triclops cult, they've turned against magic and now sort of worship technology, which I loved. And so Teela kind of has a similar reaction, where she's sort of like thinks magic it's maybe a good thing, or it's better that magic is pretty much gone now. But like Zach is sort of saying, my big issue with Teela is that so much of her character development is devoted to this sort of, to me, really kind of like weak, phony conflict where she's like so upset that she was never told that Adam is He-Man. And I just feel like it's like, well, why did he lie to me? And it's like, well, because the sorceress said, like, don't tell anyone, because most of the time you're like weak, Adam. And, if Skeletor knew that, it would be a big advantage for him. And that's like a really good reason. And so like, that there's never going to be any interesting conflict around this why did you lie to me, because he has a perfectly good reason for it. So I wish that they had like leans in more to the magic versus technology angle, which was to me the most interesting part of the show.
Yeah, I agree with that. I had a very hard time with that. For me, it feels like they frequently do this with women characters where, their lives are fine. Like she's just gotten promoted. She's got a great relationship with her dad. She was just hugging him. And then she finds out that, somebody lied to me about something. And then that's it. I'm throwing down my sword and I'm walking out and I'm never talking to you again, for years and years. And it's just, it perpetuates this, the stereotype of the, hysterical, over emotional woman who holds a grudge. And I'm just like, I really wish they hadn't done that. And I understand you got 25 minutes for your first episode and you need that character change, but it's very contrived and, it just doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah. It drives me nuts. It reminded me of that character arc in The Force Awakens with Rey just being like, no, I gotta go back to the planet where there's fucking nothing happening or whatever. It's like, who wants it? Who wants these are the heroes of the story, and they're just trying to, like, she does the same thing where her friend, I forget her friend's name, who's a great character.
Andrea.
Andra's like, well, I'm gonna be the hero, and so I'm like, okay, well, Andra's cool, even if Tila is just being annoying and just like wanting to run away from being a hero.
Yeah. I want to get Chris back in here. Chris, what do you think about what we've been saying here?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the motivation behind Tila leaving is one of the weakest elements of the new show. It's very slightly more complex than that, I guess, because of the fact that, you know, it's also a bit of the fact that she has this weird relationship with both Adam and He-Man, and to then try to reconcile in her mind, wait, so that was actually the same person all along, and I didn't get a chance to have any kind of closure with either of them because they were both ripped away from me. I think part of it was just she was all messed up from that. But yes, far and away, the weakest of all the character arcs, the way it was written. But, you know, I do think there were so many other really interesting character arcs that I was willing to kind of just forgive that one, or at least just not think about it as much. I thought Eva Lynn's character arc was great. She was a great character.
Yep.
I mean, I was so happy with, for lots of reasons, that she and Orko end up on Trala, because number one, just for fan service, it was great that they brought, even if it was a fantasy vision of Trala, just seeing Trala in the episode was great. Seeing the sort of connection that these two very different magicians, or, you know, wizards, sorcerers, whatever, had with each other was great. Like I said, I loved the whole Triclops arc. I loved the, basically all of the other arcs were super interesting to me. And, to the extent that they added new elements, which, now I never actually did watch any of the reboots, the anime one or the one in 2002. So I don't know if they were riffing on anything from those, but like the new stuff that was added, like that whole afterlife thing, I thought was super cool. The whole Subternia and Praeternia in terms of the mythology of the planet was great. And I really liked that they finally explained why it's called Masters of the Universe, because the orb didn't just ruin magic for Eternia, it was going to destroy the entire universe. So like, if this didn't get remedied, the universe was seeking to exist. I mean, that's why Trala lost its magic. Every planet that exists was going to wither and die if they didn't save this. And so that was kind of cool to me. It certainly upped the stakes. And so, so, I mean, definitely a couple of missteps in there, but I think overall there were so many, good steps that I was willing to forgive a couple of those.
Yeah, like I said, I only watched the first 2 episodes of the 2002 show, but my understanding is that they were lifting some elements from that, like the Gray Skull character is apparently from that show. But it's like, there's this issue in fantasy and science fiction so much where there's like these like things that are affecting the whole world or the whole universe. And if you're not careful, it can make the human level problems fade to insignificance. So like under ordinary circumstances, I could see Tila being upset if she found out like her friend had been lying to her or whatever. But it's like contrasting that against, he just sacrificed himself to save the entire universe. Like her concerns like seem so petty, and so that's why I think like it would have been better like if she just watched this orb almost destroy the whole universe, and she's just like, okay, magic is just like bad news, like let's not like have it anymore. And then it seems like her natural arc would be she runs into this Triclops cult and sees like what happens when you make an idol of technology, and then that's part of her whole journey of coming back to the realization that like, no, the universe needs magic in it needs He-Man in it, etc. That seems like it was like sitting right there, and it seems really interesting to me, and it just seems like that's the direction they should have gone with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So we're all in agreement there.
I agree with that there.
Yeah. So in terms of, I'm trying to think, I think all the other characters, I basically liked the way that they portrayed them, right? So we got what, Beastman, Evelyn we
Mhm.
mentioned, Man-at-Arms.
I thought that Beastman should have been against the Triclops for other reasons other than, hey, don't hurt Evelyn, because why is his alliance with her? His alliance should be with the beasts that he controls, which are they're right. So we didn't describe what they're doing. So they take these like nano machines and they drink these nano machines and then they become like part machine, right? So Beastman being like a beast, being like of the, animal order of the natural world should be like, opposed to this force of mixing technology with flesh and like polluting the natural world and the natural beasts. And that's what I thought that would have been way cooler if they had gone that way. And like immediately I was like, wait, that's the way you're just making this guy just a bodyguard when he could be like way more interesting. So that was my gripe with him.
I totally agree with that. I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
I think they should have played up the beast angle more, but I also found it kind of charming, his emotional attachment to Evelyn, and I think some of that might have been borrowed from hints in the early series, but I think some of it, I just assumed that in the interim between when, Grayskull fell and the, when we pick up again in this post-apocalyptic world, that somehow the two of them had gravitated toward each other and this kind of emotional bond had formed. But so I actually kind of found that, I found that charming. But I agree, it would have been much better in terms of, keeping true to his character if he had also had a concern for the beasts. Something just occurred to me more so even than the Tila issue we've mentioned. One of the biggest stumbling blocks for me was a little bit of confusion I had with how much time was supposed to have passed between when Grayskull fell and when we pick up again in this post-apocalyptic world, because I mean, some of the characters look like they've aged, and I understand Tila, maybe she was supposed to just be like maybe 20 or something, and so she wouldn't have looked as aged by this time. But then you had characters like her sort of sidekick, Andrea, who, when the first mention of Grayskull says something like, oh, yes, my grandfather used to tell me stories about Grayskull. It's like, well, wait a minute. This wasn't like generations ago, And so I feel like sometimes there were a few cues that were off as to how much time was supposed to have passed. And that felt nebulous to me. But again, whatever. It didn't ruin the show for me, but it definitely was. I felt like someone didn't really think that through.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I was very confused, and then I'm like, oh, I guess it's been years, like a decade, because the sorceress looks old, like an old woman, but that could be because the magic is gone.
Right.
Evelyn's hair is white. Man at Arms
hair was always white.
No, wasn't it dark?
No.
She wore like a hat.
That was her hat. There was a few episodes in the 80s where she took her hat off and she had a white sort of buzz cut.
Oh, see, I'm you know what? I'm probably remembering the movie, the 87 movie.
Right. Oh, let's not talk about that.
Yeah, no.
But it sounds like there's that Zach and I have a disagreement, because I think at this point they can't change it too much. But I think if you were starting from scratch with this story, you would want to make Prince Adam look way, way different from He-Man. And you would want to make Cringer. I think it should just be like a boy and his cat, and then they turn into like He-Man and Battle Cat. And so nobody would necessarily connect the two. I'm not suggesting they do that at this point, because there's so much, like, people have so much invested in these characters, but Zach, it sounds like it bothers you when they try to make He-Man look or like make Adam look too different from He-Man.
Yeah, I'm just really fond of that idea that He-Man is like, that the identity of this person is that they're really, really heroic and that they play the bumbling fool. And that was one of the things when I was watching last night, that that 2002 version just seemed like he just seemed like a shitty kid, you know. And I like, well, who cares? Then I like this hero to be like all that is good, like, and he's just kind of playing the dumb fool when he's, you know, around his parents and around Tila. And then, you know, he does, like I said, he does the Superman thing where he just quickly changes, and, you know, for whatever reason, we all buy it with Superman. So
I mean, I don't.
I don't either. That's always been a question of
Lois Lane
Superman. Yeah.
Sure.
I guess maybe it's just like an outdated thing that I will just, it's like a trope that I'm fine with as just being a fantasy trope that I'm fond of. But yeah, because then otherwise it's just this kid that has whatever childish that, you know, that isn't particularly heroic. The only thing that makes him heroic is that he has a sword and that he turns into He-Man because he has this superpower sword. I like the idea that at least for this type of storytelling, right, which is not, they're trying to make it more complex, but I mean, it's sword and sorcery, and it's like let's like let our heroes to just be like, try to always do the right thing and always do the just thing, and even if that is like not killing Skeletor, you know, saving Skeletor. There's like so many times that He-Man could let Skeletor die in the original series and he saves him, and Skeletor is like, I do things for evil, why do you save me, or whatever. And I don't know, I think that's really cool, and I think it's robbed when it's just a character switching back and forth, like I don't know, Billy Batson or whatever turning into Shazam.
I guess that brings up, I mean, you know, like both the 2002 show and this one try to take He-Man and turn it into something serious and dramatic and adult. And I wonder if that's going to have the same staying power that the original show had, which is sort of like goofy and childish and, you know, funny, and, you know, you can just watch it all day, and none of the episodes are great and none of them are terrible. It's just kind of like, you know, it's just sort of affable and entertaining. It was making me think a lot of the like the Adam West Batman versus the Christopher Nolan Batman. And like, I guess people do like those two different interpretations of that character that Batman sort of lends himself to. But I wonder, is He-Man just kind of inherently a sort of like silly 80s character, and you're never going to get too much mileage out of trying to take it super seriously. So, Andrea, what do you think?
I mean, that's what we've been doing for the last decade, is reinventing our heroes as flawed, somewhat possibly angry, somewhat sociopathic people who, you know, sort of teeter on the edge of being hero and also villain. I personally like characters with more depth. I kept thinking when I was watching this that as I'm liking the fact that it's more adult, my reaction to Star Wars Rogue One, which is my favorite Star Wars movie now, it's because everybody dies, because that's reality. You know, this is still a throwback. He-Man is that old, straight up hero versus villain. Hero always wins. Hero never hurts anybody. Which just personally for me, I never buy. I mean, it's nostalgia, but as storytelling, it does bother me.
So do you think that you'll keep watching, like, say the show were to go on for seasons, would you keep watching it? Like, are you in the market for a serious He-Man show?
I am. I will watch the next part of this season. I guess it's like season 1, part 2, I guess is what's going to come. Yeah, I do want to see, you know, I like the twist ending of episode 5. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
And they planted a whole bunch of stuff that obviously is going to be resolved with, you know, Tila and the Sorceress's relationship, which we know from back in the 80s. And that's obvious. They hinted at that. They came so close to revealing it a million times. You know?
Yeah, I know. It was very heavy-handed, but okay.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think we're like basically working our way back to the status quo where like people don't know Adam is He-Man and like all that kind of stuff, or is this show gonna continue to go in a completely new direction, do you think?
Well, assuming we even have Adam anymore. I mean, they'd have to resurrect him a second time.
Yeah. Well, we don't get it. It's not confirmed that he's dead.
I think he's. I mean, I don't know. My prediction is he's coming back, and I think Orko's coming back. I mean, it seems like you can't kill off. Like,
right. I hear.
There's like certain things that just make the show appealing, and those are. It's just like hard for me to believe that they would permanently discard the things that like are assets to the show the assets of the show to begin with.
Yeah, but, I mean, although who knows? I mean, it could be some other form that he stays back. But I would actually disagree with the premise of your question, which is like, to me, what made the show memorable was not the lighthearted goofiness. Like when I think of the show, I don't remember those moments unless it's with sort of mild annoyance. Like I always was. What made the show have staying power for me was the depth and was the darkness that was beneath the goofiness. And there were shows that explored some of the same themes that are being explored now, even back in the 80s. Like I'm not going to remember the title or the season, but there was this one where some sort of glowing sphere called Ohm appeared because the war between Skeletor and the forces of Castle Grayskull had become so widespread that it was literally threatening to destroy the whole world. And you see like cities being burned out and peasants, having to flee their farms. And it was just like it had spilled over into all out war. And it looked like we were looking at the end of Eternia. And this glowing sphere appears and basically freezes time. This is back in the 80s series. And
yeah, well, this is episode 16 of season 2, The Arena.
Oh, is that what it's called? Okay. So, and I mean, so you saw how the darkness, and I remember that episode vividly, like how that presence had to step in and be like, guys, take a time out here. You're about to utterly destroy yourselves. And I mean, it's kind of weird and heavy-handed the way they did it. And they always left it open-ended. Like, I think that one ended with like, I'll be back and I'll see how you're all doing again in the future. And then they never had the follow-up. But, and things like when you went back and saw the history of the sorceress when she was a young girl and how she came into her power and her whole backstory and all that kind of stuff is what I remember from the show. I mean, the sort of lighthearted goofiness, I remember the show in spite of that, I feel. So I think this is prime sort of property for exploring the more adult sides of it. And to me, it just resonates with me for the same reasons that it resonated as a kid. But I don't know. So I guess I kind of disagree with you on that.
Okay, well, it's funny because thinking back to when I was a kid, I hated Orko. I was like, why is this stupid comic relief character in the show? I hated him so much. And now I watch it, I'm like, oh, he's fun. But yeah, so maybe as a kid, yeah, I was, I don't know. It's hard for me to remember now how much I was into the humor in camp and how much I wasn't, but I don't know. I just wonder how much He-Man is just inherently a product of the 80s and just the whole idea of like the super muscular guy called He-Man who's the hero. And like could that ever like transcend generations past like the people who grew up with it, not just like as like a revival or whatever, but on any kind of like enduring popularity?
I mean, it's kind of like the Hulk, right? I mean, the Hulk's been around for a while, and people still. I'm not sure if it's was ever as popular as He-Man, but I think ideally for me it would keep the best like of both of those things. That charm of like the charming, super muscular hero that He-Man is, and then the bleak, stories and plots and setting of like, this entropy or this like dying planet. But then keeping like the heroes, you can have like flawed heroes, but like, I don't know. I think keeping them like in the way that they were kind of originally, just like, I don't know, maybe it is just goofy, but you can have both the goofy and the bleak, and I think that would be what I want to see in the second half of the season.
Right, because it raises the issue of why did He-Man decline in popularity to start with? And I think we all saw the toys that, I think they talked about this in the Toys That Made Us, right? That I have the number somewhere, but it was like in 1986, He-Man toys sold $400 million. You know, they sold $400 million worth of He-Man toys. And then in 1987 or something, they sold 7 million or something like that. Oh yeah, it's right here. That's exactly. Right. So
that's got to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles killing that, right? I feel like that has to be, because that was like the new thing that kids were probably into, right?
Well, I think they were also talking, because I watched the Power of Grayskull thing. They were also talking about how they flooded the market and they weren't getting them out. It was like a marketing issue with them. The problem,
and also, yeah, go ahead.
No, just they started to go goofy because they jumped the shark, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the toy marketing was outpacing the show and was going overboard. But I also think I don't know, and obviously there's people who study this and are experts in it. But like, I wonder how much of the decline in popularity was simply that the toys weren't selling as well, and so they decided to pull the plug on the show. I wonder if there's any data to show whether or not the show was declining in popularity, because like I said, I didn't own a single toy, and I was like probably one of their biggest super fans of the show. And I would have kept watching it for years to come, even though I was kind of aging out of it. So that's a kind of weird mix, because you do have that added variable of the decision being made for purely mercenary selling reasons of the toys, which is kind of independent from the storyline in the show.
The toys, there was also one other point that documentary, The Toys That Made Us, mentioned, and that was that they overproduced side characters, and so you couldn't actually get like you couldn't get the titular cast because it was just bullshit other characters that kids didn't want for their set. So you couldn't introduce like new, 5, 6, 7-year-olds into it because they actually couldn't get their hands on the OG cast, and they didn't care about the new cast. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what, the ex people at Mattel believe.
Yeah, well, so in these two documentaries, there are two theories floated, and one is the lack of quality control, that they just like made so many shitty toys nobody cared about, and that just kind of like killed the whole thing. And then there's also the like She-Ra came along, and then like boys didn't want to play with He-Man anymore because it made He-Man seem girly, that there was the She-Ra show. But then there's also the thing Zach was mentioning, which I think is it seems is the biggest factor to me, is that He-Man, we said, was like a one-of-a-kind thing when it was introduced. And within just like 2 or 3 years, you had a ton of competing shows that were, I think, all better. Sorry, Chris. They were all better than He-Man.
Wait, you think Thundercats was better than He-Man?
Yeah, well, 100%, yeah. So let me just list the shows. We got Transformers, Thundercats, Mask, The Real Ghostbusters, Bionic 6, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and DuckTales, and G.I. Joe. Those all came out between 84 and 87. And I think those are all better than He-Man. Some of them much better. Some of them are sort of questionable, like maybe not G.I. Joe but I think Thundercat, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't rewatched a ton of Thundercats, but I think it's definitely better than He-Man. That's my sense. I'd have to go check that. But Chris, what do you think about that? Because do you think that He-Man's better than all those shows?
Well, let's put it this way. It's kind of hard too, because, as I said, I was starting to get too old for those shows by the ones that came out afterwards. So it's a difficult question to answer. I loved Thundercats as well. It's certainly as good as He-Man, and in many ways, the writing and the story is much more has much more sort of arc, long-term arc to it, rather than the really episodic style that a lot of He-Man had. So that was superior. But I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think you've got two things. If someone was looking at the He-Man show back in the 80s, whoever was, whatever producers and studio people were looking at it, if they were looking at it purely as a commercial to sell the toys, and the toys were no longer selling, and they decided, well, therefore the show is failing to do what it's meant to do, that's a very different question. And my sense is that's probably entirely why the show was canceled, because they were just like, well, the show is not selling the toys anymore. Let's not bother making these long form commercials. But for people who were watching it, I don't know how many people were actually just thinking of it as a commercial. I certainly wasn't. I was just watching it because it was a good show. And then of the shows that you mentioned, the only ones that really I think appealed to me were Thundercats for sure, which was the strongest by far out of all the ones you mentioned that came afterwards. I watched.
I think DuckTales is the most quality.
Well, but see, DuckTales and Ninja Turtles, like this is just a personal quirk of mine. Like those are shows that I would never have gotten into because they were too goofy. I couldn't get past the threshold of like, well, I can't take this seriously. This is just nonsense. Like to me, it's like the same thing as watching like Bugs Bunny cartoons. It's like, they're great and they can be fun, but I'm not going to get invested in them. It's like, yeah, if it's on, I love it. They're classic or whatever. But like, it's just asinine. And, it's like, I could never take.
I'm with you on this one because, and I think the problem with you have is the same problem I have, which is we were too old for it at that point. Maybe. I was way too old for Ninja Turtles or DuckTales. Never watched DuckTales. I don't think I watched either one of them. As you were saying, my other favorites of the ones that Dave mentioned were Thundercats and, for me, Transformers.
And I actually, some of G.I. Joe, but again, only when you started to get the sort of backstories of the characters and stuff, I got into that. The thing is, I think even if I had been young, even if I had been 10 when DuckTales and Ninja Turtles came out, I just think for me personally, I would have had absolutely no interest in either of them. And I would have had the same interest in watching those as watching an episode of Tom and Jerry. It's like, yeah, all right, fine, I'll put it on. It's just something to look at. But I would have had no investment in them.
Yeah, I agree.
But again, sort of the reason I bring them up is because it's just like these were He-Man killers in 1986 or whatever, right? So
if you say so.
Can He-Man survive in today's entertainment ecosystem where there's like tons and tons of, like, I feel like He-Man was like this like hothouse flower that existed in a particular time and place, and like you can sort of be nostalgic about it, and that's fun. But I don't know if it could ever survive in today's marketplace.
Well, and yet here we are.
Yeah,
with Kevin Smith and all the other iterations that have come before now. I mean, I just think again, it's just how is it handled? I think it could. I think it has a much greater staying power than any of the other ones you mentioned, with the exception of Thundercats, which I think could also do that.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has like been pretty much on air since whenever it aired in the 80s. There's been a version of it just constantly. So I don't know. I think that one is the one that's like really, really stayed. And then they even made, they made big budget, successful, indie movies and then also not indie movies. But I think that there's got to be a market for this. I mean, this is like classic sword and sorcery, man. Like with kind of like the superhero genre, which is super popular right now. It's like kind of like an amalgam between a lot of genres. I feel like there has to be a universe where this comes back and is popular. Like there's so many nerdy things that got really popular again. Like the Transformer movies each one of those are $1 billion movie. And they've made like a half dozen of them. So it's like, there has to be a way where this is treated, where whether it's super serious and we go at like Robert E. Howard style, mixed with like a dash of Jack Vance, or we go full goofy like the cartoon. But there is room for potential for this. I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, is there anything else you've wanted to say, like, or even anything else about Masters of the Universe Revelation that we haven't touched on? Right?
Well, this is maybe just my pet peeve, but as I was watching them, I watched the credits, the opening, right at the beginning, and it stood out to me that there's 5 episodes, there's only one woman writer, and the main character, for all intents and purposes, is a woman. And I just don't understand why you couldn't get more women writers in there. I was just a little, and no women directors either. It was just 2 guys. Watching the documentary this morning, they had more women working on the original show in the 80s than they do on this. So that really ticked me off. There's a call now for more strong women characters. And that's great. But you know what? We need more women behind the scenes. We need more women writing women's stories instead of men writing, what they think how they think women are. Personal pet peeve, but I was kind of pissed by that. And still am.
I think you're totally right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally right. And I think we would have gotten a better Tila arc had that happened.
Yeah.
I was actually surprised how many women's names were in the credits. Like, a lot of the episodes I watched were directed by Gwen somebody or other.
Yep. And there were women animators and there were women designers, and I saw so few women names as producers, maybe 1 or 2 women producers, where there were like 8 producers, maybe 1 woman producer, no directing, 1 woman writer on 5 episodes. And it was just like, it was infuriating once I realized it.
Speaking of the credits, though, we haven't really said anything about, there's like the cast is like Mark Hamill as Skeletor, like Sarah Michelle Gellar, Alicia Silverstone, like
Lena Headey.
Lena Headey kills it as Evil Lynn.
Yes. Yep.
That was that aside from Mark Hamill, that was my favorite voice casting. I thought she just was perfect for that role.
She was. And it was also a good character too. So she had a lot of emotional, a lot of character arc. She had a big character arc, and it was like, there was this one line when she says, I followed him, meaning Skeletor, I followed him around. I could have been a master of the universe myself, but I followed him around. And I was like, that's a knife in the gut of every woman who's ever like, let a guy, be more important, backed up a shitty man. So that was there was a lot of great stuff for her. I thought it was a great character.
Well, like this is the old series. One of the episodes I watched yesterday, there's a part where Skeletor says, like, I have to go elsewhere for brains than Snake Mountain because I'm surrounded by these incompetents, talking about Beastman and Triclops. But then I'm like, well, wait, what about Eva Lynn? She seems like the most competent person in this organization.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And if you want to feel very old, Kevin Smith's daughter is now an adult, Harley Quinn Smith, and she has a voice role in this. So I was like, wow, the 90s was a long time ago.
It sure was.
I think I don't know who this actor is, and I don't think it was because of the actor, but the biggest sort of surprise breakout character for me in this one, far exceeding his function in the original series, was Roboto.
Yeah. That was like a real tearjerker.
Yeah.
And I mean, they kept true to what little bit of lore we had about Roboto from the 80s, but like, man, they took that in a really cool direction.
What a great character art too.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't fear anything.
Well, I think the best character arcs were Eva Lynn, the wizard, what's the little wizard name?
Orko.
Sorry. Orko. And Roboto.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they all did great with those characters. Everybody else,
Okay, wait. So, Chris, as the master of lore for He-Man, maybe you can answer this question for me, because in this show, Orko says that his name was actually Oracle, and he just kind of mangled it as a kid and said it Orko, and it stuck. And it's a good thing because he was always so bad at magic. At least this is the way I remember what he said, that like people would have really made fun of him if he had gone around calling himself Oracle. But then in the original cartoon, when I went back and watched it, we learned that Orko was actually the best sorcerer on Trala.
Yeah.
And that it was only once he came to Eternia that the magic was like different or something, and then he couldn't really do magic well anymore. And that seemed to be a big contradiction in the lore, at least from what I watched.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, just the whole Oracle thing, like, I don't remember that name thing. I mean, that seems to be a Kevin Smith invention, and unless he's taking that from one of the other incarnations of it. Also, another thing that seems a little inconsistent about that is the name Orko seems to fit the naming conventions of Trala, because he had an uncle named Montork. So that is, it again, sounds like it's from the same, like, why would they name someone Oracle? And then his like sort of on again, off again girlfriend is Driel. So they all have like names. Like, why would they have named anyone Oracle? Like, that just seems weird to me. So I don't know. I don't have any other particular insights into that, but I thought it was a cool little explanation. I like it, but that was definitely retconning, I think.
Actually, none of these episodes rang any bells at all in terms of specific scenes or storylines or anything, except the part where Orko meets Driel, and like she takes off her like I guess on Trala you only show your face to your like the person you're going to marry or whatever. And so there's a part where like she takes off her mask or like lifts up her hat so you can see her face, and he does the same. And you don't see either of their faces, but you sort of see the back of Orko's head, and he looks like Yoda kind of like from behind. Yeah. And I like when I saw that, I was like, wait, I remember. I'm sure I watched this as a kid. I like just that idea of like, what does Orko's face look like? Oh my God. You know, like I remember sort of being really struck by that. All right, we're pretty much out of time. Zach, anything else you wanted to mention that we haven't gotten to?
No, I really enjoyed this. I'm glad that you had me on. Are we going into final thoughts?
No, not just yet, but any like broader subjects that we haven't touched on.
Broader subjects? Nah, I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun, and I'm definitely going to watch the next series. I don't know. I'm thinking and hoping that He-Man's going to be a bigger part of the next series. I don't know if that's a subject you want to talk about, but it ends on a pretty cool cliffhanger. I thought. I think it's maybe the character arcs were not great, but like the plot as it is pretty cool. So I did like the plot for what it was, even if I wasn't behind all of the characters at all times.
Well, I said I think He-Man's coming back.
Yeah, I'm sure he is.
Zach, does anyone think he's not coming?
Oh, no, I don't. I think he's coming back. I think he's going to be big He-Man.
I wouldn't go so far as, I wouldn't go so far as to say I don't think he's coming back, but to me, it seems up in the air. And I would be fine with him not coming back, actually, because to be honest, I don't know if this is blasphemy or something, but I've always found him the least interesting character in the show. So if they get rid of him, and I by get rid of, I don't feel like even when they got rid of him in the first episode of Revelations, he's continued to loom large. You kept seeing flashback scenes with him fighting with Teela, and you kept seeing, people were talking about him, and then you find him in the afterlife. So, I mean, if he ends up having some sort of a role, like, sort of a force, a Jedi force ghost or something, I'd be fine with that if it was handled well. Like, I'm not saying an actual force ghost, but something, if someone else becomes the new He-Man, I'd be fine with that too, if it's handled well.
I think I want Adam as He-Man, but like as long as it remains kind of this ensemble cast where, we're getting a little bit of like the backstabbingness and like a little bit of the politics of, either the king and Evil Lynn and all that kind of stuff. Like that's what's pretty cool. Now those characters are like fully fleshed out. So like, I think now we can like have like different alliances and bring He-Man will be like hopefully He-Man will be a character, but like it won't be He-Man Masters of the Universe. It'll just be like he's one of the mini ensemble that, you know, that will every once in a while make a cool epic appearance, but is equal to all of the other great characters and the great world and plot as a whole.
Yeah, you know, I heard that there's another He-Man show in development that's like more aimed at kids. So it might be that that's going to be the more traditional He-Man show, and then this can be its own thing that kind of like goes off in sort of weird, unexpected directions.
I mean, I guess if I had my druthers, a term that I love, would be that they do bring He-Man back in some way. But apart from just him not, you know, from him sharing screen time with the other characters, I would hope that if they do bring him back, he's been changed in some way by this experience, not just emotionally, but like there's something different. Like there's more limitations on his powers, or there's more sacrifice when he does it, or so. If we just hit a reset button and it's back to the same old Adam turns into He-Man, and it's, you know, it's we've come. Then I feel like, well, what, you know,
what was the point?
More consequences for what he's gone through.
Yeah.
Real consequences.
Yeah. Just make him, you know, the original character and this character, very one-dimensional. I do want to see more dimensions to the character. Make him more interesting instead of just your bland, blonde, built hero with a sword.
I just feel like, you know, like what you have to be really careful with these things, that you like tweak the formula, but don't change the formula too much, because like there's just certain things that people come to the show for. And if you like change it too much, then it's like, well, why do I need to, like the fact that I like He-Man is no longer like drawing me to this, because it's something completely different. It's like you have to like really like walk that line really carefully.
Well, we didn't even mention this yet, and it's probably something worth mentioning on the show, but this thing got review bombed by exactly like what you're talking about. People found out before that He-Man wasn't going to be the main character, and they freaked the fuck out before it even aired. And so this thing has like a great critical response. If you look at like Metacritic, the critical response is high, and then the audience response is like 33%, or like, you know, something like fairly rotten. And it's unfortunate because it's like people just got pissy before they even fucking watched it. And it's like, if you watch the first episode, it's the same fucking show as the 80s, except for the, you know, the very, very end. So, you know, I don't know, like that.
No, I read some of them. They're you know, man baby, cry babies. It's just like,
it's the same. It's the same crew that complains about the new Star Trek and complains about the new Star Wars. And complains about it's just like, yeah. I mean, I don't know what they want. They just want.
They want their bland white boy. So
I guess I don't know. I mean, so I just kind of like, I hear those complaints, especially when they come out before the show is actually even aired, and it's just like, whatever. You know, you just got to kind of shrug those sort of responses off, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to totally dismiss the concern, because like I said, I had something of the same reaction when I first watched the show, but I just feel like there's like an appropriate level of outrage.
Yes. When
like the show doesn't turn out the way you want, and you know, like you got to keep it in perspective. And like by the end, I thought that this was pretty good. So, you know, I ended up being pretty satisfied with it. But I did, you know, it's not like a completely unjustified to want something that you like to not change too much. I mean, I think that's kind of natural. But you know, I think just like the outrage needs to like be kept at a reasonable level.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're out of time, so why don't we start wrapping this up? So now we will get into some final thoughts. So Andrea, final thoughts on He-Man Revelation.
Well, I mean, overall, I had my issues with it, but overall, I enjoyed it. Especially, it hooked me at episode 2, and then I was pleasantly surprised. And I will definitely watch the second half of the first season when it comes out.
Chris, final thoughts.
Yeah, I also will certainly continue to watch this. I think the biggest thing that pleased me was how fan servicey it was, that it ticked all the boxes that I was hoping it would as someone who loved the show, and it's, near and dear to my heart and from the 80s. And I loved the new directions that they took it in from that starting point. So to me, I just think it was the best of both worlds. So yeah, I look forward to seeing what happens next.
And Zach, any final thoughts if you still have any?
I mean, it's pretty much just what Andrea and Chris said. I do like to just list some recommendations. If you like this show and you want to watch it and you want more stuff like it, all of Jack Vance's Dying Earth, Planet Adventure series, all that's great. Thundar the Barbarian is also really cool. And it's slightly before this. And it's just as cheesy if you like that 80s vibe. It's got the same crappy run cycles over and over again. And obviously Conan, all the Conan stories by Robert E. Howard, and Michael Moorcock has stuff that's like this that's really cool. DC Comics apparently has a series that's very well reviewed that I'll be picking up because now I'm into this. And definitely watch the Toys That Made Us. It's really entertaining on the He-Man.
Yeah, absolutely. Do not miss the Toys That Made Us. It's absolutely hilarious. And I'll definitely watch part 2. And, as I said, the thing that really caught my interest the most was the sort of cult worshipping technology versus magic and stuff. So I hope they do more with that in part 2. But yeah, overall, I had some reservations, especially at the beginning, but I ended up thinking it was pretty good. So, even if you have mixed feelings about the first episode or so, I would stick with it because I think they do really cool things by the end. But yeah, so let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Christopher M. Cevasco, and Zach Chapman. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Christopher M. Cevasco, and Zach Chapman for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. Alright, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.